What's up guys, I'm Justin Swanstrom. Welcome back to the YouTube channel. I've had a couple people in the comments ask how to properly read a spark plug. I'm going to go ahead and give y'all a video today on what spark plugs I use, what the process that we go through, and how to read a plug at the end of the run. What I use is an NGK11. They got 8s, 9s, 10s. I use 11. It's just a colder plug. The lower the number, the hotter the plug is. The higher the number, the colder it is. So for our setup, big cubic inch nitrous motor, most common plug is the NGK11. They do have Autolite plugs. We tend to not want to use them just because they're a little bit harder to read. They're a little bit more stronger, but if you fucking Autolite up, you have completely fucked up an engine. If you mess up an NGK, at least you have somewhat of a chance of still keeping your motor in one piece. But here's the plug that we use, the NGK11. This is a warm-up plug. I'll go ahead and explain the difference between warm-up plug and plugs that we run whenever we make a pass. But look at this thing. It's about $2.20, $2.40 a plug. Here's a hot hole plug. Those are burn up plugs right there. Every time that I go to the track, Brian, my guys, they put a set of warm-up plugs in for me. Only thing those plugs are used is for me to crank the car up in the pits, warm it up, go through the gears, get everything going, and then throw them back in the trailer when I go to my next race. If I had a multiple day event, I'll fire the car back up and we'll go through warm-up plugs again. Once the motor's done warming up, I take the warm-up plugs out, I throw them back in the trailer, I put a fresh new set of plugs in for me to go make my pass. I see people all the time driving up to the staging lanes, or after they make a run, driving back to their pits, just firing the car up while they're in the lanes. That is really, if you're trying to get a proper plug read, that's not the right thing to do. Every time you fire it up, fuel's just getting on top of the plug. Sooner or later, it could possibly foul it out. Or if you're able to get a proper plug read, you need to have a cart pull you up to the staging lanes, go ahead and fire it up in the burnout box, make your pass, shut it off at 8th mile, coast down there, have somebody pull you back. My tune-up is pretty good right now. Dad has worked on it hard over the last year and a half, 2 years, so I don't go through a lot of spark plugs no more because I'm not changing nothing in the motor. It's got its deal. But I'm gonna take you over to Dad here in a minute, and he's gonna show you what he looks for down inside a spark plug.
I'm Big Country, aka Corey Swanstrom. If you talk to 10 different people in the pits, there's 10 different ways to read a spark plug. You know, I've been reading plugs for probably 20 years. Gotten better here lately at them. Every engine is different, every combo is different. You really got to find the fuel curve and see how much timing the motor wants and how timing friendly the motor is. You know, some motors are better. The heads, they got a softer quench in them. No two motors are alike. No two motors are going to like the same thing. So after we cycle the motor in the pits and we get ready to go, you know, we got what we call a warm-up plug. This plug right here is basically a warm-up plug. We'll keep several of these. These are just old plugs from old runs, and we'll keep them just to warm the motor up. After Justin gets done doing his maintenance on his motor, he'll take and put a new set of plugs in, and we'll drag the car to the starting line. He won't fire the car up until we got it sitting in the water box. You know, he'll fire it up, he'll do his burnout, he'll make his run. It usually don't take, man, probably for us to make a whole run, it's probably not more than 20 seconds, to be honest with you. So after Justin goes through the traps, he'll reach up and throw the car in neutral and shut the motor down as soon as possible. We'll pull the car back, they'll pull the plugs out. I'll be inside the trailer looking over the data, and then I'll look at the plugs. It takes about 3 good runs. You know, for tuning nitrous, for tuning big nitrous, the best way to tune nitrous is to go out there and make a 330 hit, then make a 500-foot hit, then make a hit to the traps at the 660. That way you can see what the motor's doing every time, and hopefully you don't kill the motor up if you're off on your tune-up. So when I get the plugs out, I look at them, and this is what I'll look for. I use a plug reader, which is a magnifying glass, where I can actually look at the plug and really to look down inside the porcelain and see what the fuel ring looks like from the motor, the way it's burning. You know, 10 different tuners will tell you 10 different ways. What I look for is, I'll put this magnifying glass in there with a small scope so I can look down in there. I look for a fuel ring that's going to be down around the bottom of the porcelain down in there. You know, for what I look for a light tan, sometimes a little darker tan, depending on what kind of DA we're running in. If the DA is real low, you know, I'll look for a darker tan, wanting a little more fuel on it. If the DA is real high, you know, 2,500, 3,000 foot, you know, I'm gonna look for a little bit of a lighter tan. It doesn't need as much fuel. So that's all I'm looking for when I look down in the porcelain. I'm just looking at the fuel ring. It's gonna be down here in the bottom. I'm gonna turn this on And I'm not sure if you guys can look down in there or not, but basically you're gonna look down inside here, and I'll have the camera come here and see if you can actually see what I'm seeing down there. So I'm looking at the bottom of this plug. This plug's got a dark tan ring on it, fuel ring, all the way around the bottom of the base of that porcelain. If you was to cut this off right here, take that off, you'd be able to see the fuel ring real well. Well, I don't have time to cut all them plugs off and do all that shit, so I look at it this way. They do, but I don't have time for that. So anyways, put the camera here and see if you can look at this. So if you can look down there and you see that dark ring around the base down there, that's the fuel ring that I'm looking for. Also, what you want to look for is just basically a good fuel ring around the base of the plug right here. Just to make sure you got fuel in the motor, you're going to want to see a fuel ring all the way around the base of it. So good dark ring. You don't want it shiny, good dark ring. Then when you start reading the plug, I'll take my plugs and I'll set them in a rack. I don't have a tray here. I don't know where it's at. But anyways, I'll set them all. And for me, they're going to be easier if I line them all the same way and look at them from the side. So when you look at them from the side, what you're basically looking at is you're looking at the heat, how far the heat is getting on the plug and how far the timing mark is getting on the plug. So when you look at the end of the tip, you want to make sure it isn't discolored, it's gotten too much of a heat range in it. If it got too hot, then depending on what type of plug you run, this is 11, so this is going to be the coldest NGK plug that we run in our motor. So we can't put a colder plug in it. If I'm building a little too much heat up in that cylinder right there, it's either over time, sometimes it's not over time, sometimes the motor's just running lean there, I can put more fuel in that hole. That's the good thing about EFI. Run EFI, it's just a stroke of a key. Where if you're running a carbureted motor, you actually got to go change the jets. That's the two things I look for. I look for the timing mark, and like I said, it takes about 3 hits. By the time you burn that CAD off the end of that spark plug tip, you'll actually see where the timing mark will start hitting on the end of this electrode here. And where I run my timing mark is just where it starts getting around this bend right here. When that timing mark getting right about around that bend, I'm not going to run it no further. If you run it on further down, it's probably going to end up looking like this right here. If you get too much timing in the motor, it'll start eating up. Although, I'll get to why this plug is like this. This didn't actually happen due to timing. Well, it did, but it didn't. So anyways, after you get about 3 runs, you're going to want to see your timing mark on the end of your strap. You get your timing mark where you want it to be. And then you're going to look at your heat, just to make sure it's not building too much heat up in that cylinder. If you start getting that tip starts getting to be blue, and it's building a lot of heat, you got to cool that hole down. And generally what that means is not every cylinder makes the same amount of power in your motor. You're going to have a couple cylinders that make more power. I have a couple cylinders in each one of my motors that make more power. Essentially, you want the whole motor to be optimized as much as you can, but you're going to take those 1 or 2 holes that are building more heat, and you're going to calm them down so you can keep bringing the rest of the motor up. What you don't want to do is take power away from the motor, because then you're taking it away from it all. And if you only got 2 holes that are making more power, and you take power away from the whole motor, then you're taking power away from the whole motor as a whole. That's not what you want to do. You got to individually time your cylinders. You got to individually put fuel in your cylinders to make them happy. So you're going to have 1, 2, maybe 3 holes. I got holes that I'll have as much as 2 degrees timing out of that separate hole. And I'll have where I got more fuel in that hole, trying to cool it down. But then I'll keep bringing the rest of the motor up to get the whole motor optimized. That's where you want to get the most power out of your motor. Now, what I was showing you, that plug that got ate up. If you look at this plug here, you get too much time in, they start detonating, they rattle on the rings. Pan vac is a good thing for you to have. You should have a race pack or whatever type of data system you got in your car. You really need to have a pan vac gauge. You're going to watch that pan vac. When them rings start rattling, the pan vac's going to drop. It'll tell you in that run where that motor's starting to get unhappy. It'll tell you where you got to really start looking at it. You got to start protecting the motor. You can either watch your pan vac. That's a good way to gauge, before the motor eats shit, or you're going to pump the motor. You're going to do a leak down on it. If you leak down, you'll see each cylinder when they're starting to go away, and you can protect those motors. That particular cylinder, you'll take some volume off that cylinder, some timing off that cylinder to keep that motor living, so you can make it through the race. So how far you can make. I mean, we've hurt some cylinders, and we've ran it the rest of the weekend, and hell, we've ran it beyond that too. So there's a way you can doctor them up to keep them living. Now these plugs, what I was telling you is we really don't hurt too many motors. The builders today have got these engines pretty precise, and they're really efficient. I mean, we run a lot of nitrous on our motor, but they're really efficient. If you hurt them today, you almost hurt them because you just didn't know what the fuck you were doing, or B, something bad happened.
That would be me.
We hurt this motor in this car out here last weekend, we had a malfunction between the cam sensor from the cam sync and the crank trigger. When it was spiking up, what happened was our lockup came on and it was spiking that RPM up, and the ECU is thinking the motor's hitting 10,000 RPMs when it's really not. The first time when it had the nitrous backfire, so when it spiked up to 10,000 RPMs, you know, of course the spark rev limiter came on, you got a fuel map rev limiter, so it backfired, blew the scoop off. Now that's just a malfunction between the cam sync and the crank trigger that caused that backfire. We didn't find it. We had to go to the next round. We're gonna race our way in. I kind of told Justin that something bad could happen with the motor because I couldn't find why it was doing it. Went out there, did spike up just a little bit. When it spiked up to 7,700, which is past our RPM shift point, the lockup came on, it shifted to 2.3, it lugged the motor down. That's what caused these plugs here. So when it drug that motor down with the lockup, it basically destroyed the holes. They started rattling the rings, they started eating shit, and it just wasn't happy. So that's not a timing problem. You know, when them rings start rattling, it'll start sucking that oil around the rings. When oil hits the combustion chamber, oil's gonna detonate. That's what happens. Oil won't burn. So when the oil comes around those rings, starts detonating, starts eating shit. That's about the gist of it, man. You know, like I said, I'm still a novelist. I still learn every day. If you talk to 10 different people, they're going to tell you 10 different ways to tune. A lot of the big tuners that runs these big motors like we do, they run the Autolite plug. I think it's a 3932. Some of them run a 3931. But I don't run the Autolite plugs because for me, the Autolite plugs are very hard to read. I have a problem reading them. I feel like I can read the NGK a lot better. I run the NGK 11s. To me, it just burns the cat off the plug a little bit better and it's a little bit cleaner. The Autolite plug, in my experience in the past, when you burn a tip on an Autolite plug, you usually burn a piston. So the electrode is so hardcore on it that when that plug eats shit, the motors ate shit. What I do like about the NGKs is I can burn a tip on these, something bad happened, and I'll still come back, pump that motor, have 120 pounds, I can still run it. I can doctor the hole up. I don't think that the NGKs are as tough as a plug and take as much abuse as the Autolite does. The NGK will give up before it just purely takes out your motor. So that's the reason why I run the NGK plugs. Like I said, everybody's different. A lot of the big tuner guys, they run Autolites, and they're probably a little more experienced than me, so they're better with it. I just choose to run this plug. It works for our camp. We just pulled the motor apart. We took a 959 apart that had 57 runs on the same pistons. That said, that's the way we run our operation. That's how I do mine. Hope these tips help you. And if you go out there and fuck your shit up, don't blame me. Big country out.
Mike, you tore up a lot of stuff, haven't you?
Oh, I tore up some shit. He helped me though.
Well, he just said he didn't. He don't help. He was just giving you some tips.
No,
but because you went and tore your shit up, you can't blame him.
Right. But he put the tune up in there.
I hear you. All right, guys. There's a couple key points. Getting plugs. You got warm-up plugs. You got plugs that go make you pass. Try to get pulled up to the burnout box. Do not fire it up in the staging lanes. That's the dumbest shit I've ever seen. People are trying to warm the motor up and all that. You're not going to get a proper plug read by trying to fire it up and showing off to your girlfriend or your cousin's uncle. So get up there. Go ahead, fire it up in the burnout box. Go ahead and make you a pass. Get to the other end, 8th mile, shut that thing off, coast down there. Have somebody pull you back to your pits. Do not drive the car back if you want to get a proper plug read. It's going to take roughly 3 passes to get the right read on a plug. Go ahead and read it and go on and go fast.
And don't come home like this, because you're about to spend some money.